Hey class, today we're going to be talking about mnemonic devices as we get towards the end of our memory, our discussions on memory. You'll remember, hopefully, that we've been talking about with memory how you take a piece of information and then you store it and then hopefully are able to later retrieve that information and use it in some sort of meaningful way. Um, and the strategy we're going to talk about here today with mnemonic devices or these types of devices um, will help us to be able to do that more effectively. So first, mnemonic devices are an encoding strategy. So remember that encoding is taking a piece of information and then putting it into our memory systems for us to then store and then use, hopefully retrieve later to be able to use. So these encoding strategies we use in order to organize and or chunk information. And remember that chunking just means taking large pieces of information and then breaking them up into pieces so that we can remember more at a time. An example, if you'll remember, is using phone numbers. So 10-digit numbers can be hard to remember unless we're breaking them up into sets of 3 or 4 digits like we do with phone numbers. So we encode, or they use this encoding strategy to organize and chunk information for easier and more meaningful storage and retrieval of memories. So one of the big things we're going to do today, we have these two examples of this Pegword system and this method of loci. We're going to use these to create these really vivid pictures and these kind of weird mental associations because our memories are really good at encoding and then retrieving things that are out of the ordinary. Oftentimes we will forget things that we do on a day-to-day basis. For example, every time I walk into my apartment, I just kind of automatically lock the door. I don't even think about it. And you may have these little weird things that you do on a day-to-day basis that you just do automatically without thinking about. And so mnemonic devices, though, are going to do the exact opposite. We're going to take something that might be pretty mundane, and then we're going to paint and create this vivid association that allows us to remember it much more easily. So we're gonna dive right into this with the Pegword system. So you'll see right in the middle of the screen here, I have this list of 10 sets of words that rhyme together. These are your peg words. This 1 bun, 2 shoe, 3 tree, 4 door, 5 hive, 6 stick, 7 heaven, 8 gate, 9 line, 10 hen. That's the Pegword system. So because they're simple words, you all know how to count from 1 to 10. And so you are able to probably really easily think of 1 and then a word that rhymes with 1. 2, then a word that rhymes with 2. 3 and a word that rhymes with 3, and so on all the way through to 10. So being able to memorize this part of the Pegword system is the really easy part. And the second word here doesn't really matter nearly as much as the fact that it rhymes with the first word. So you might find yourself later on, after you've become more familiar with the system, going, I don't really like the word line for 9. Maybe I like the word vine instead. Or you may say, again, something else with one of the other words. You may just realize that you don't really like that word. You find it hard to create an association with that word. So you might change it out for something else later. However, it is important, though, that when you think of the second word, for example, with 8, that you wouldn't be able to use the word hate, because hate isn't something that's easy to visualize. You want to make sure that you're using something that's concrete, something that is an object that you know that you can visualize. And yes, heaven is a little bit maybe hard for that, but 7 also doesn't rhyme with a lot of words. So if you think of something else that is concrete that you can use for that, that'd be great, because I'd actually love to be able to switch this word out too, but I haven't really thought of a better alternative. However, with this Pegword system, now you've looked at these numbers, you've got these kind of rhyming words that you have associated with them. Now, in order to use the Pegword system, you need a list of things that you're trying to remember. And the Pegword system works exceptionally well with lists. So imagine you're being asked to go buy some groceries, or you're thinking you want to go buy some groceries, but you really don't want to carry around a list with you. The Pegword system is great for dealing with this type of situation. So imagine you're needing to go to the store and you need to buy like an onion and an apple, some potatoes, cinnamon, bread, milk, eggs, cheese, broccoli, and carrots. So if you were wanting to use your Pegword system, you'll notice I've just given you 10 things you need to go buy. So what you would do is you would take your Pegword system and then you would associate each one of these words with something on your list. You would create a vivid mental image between the peg word and the word that you are trying, or the thing you're trying to remember. So for example, if you were going one bun and you need to buy an onion, maybe you imagine yourself biting into a nice, hot, delicious bun out of the oven, but inside of it, there's just a full onion in there. And now you've got this image. Maybe you really love onions. Maybe you really like this. Maybe you don't. And it's suddenly this really shocking feeling. So you have this happen. And then you could do the same thing with an apple. You've got two shoe, and you're like, oh, I need to buy an apple or a couple apples. So maybe you now imagine you've got a pair of shoes on the ground, and each one of these shoes has an apple in it. So like, oh, I got to buy some apples. 3 tree, you imagine potatoes. You've got potatoes growing off of this tree. And you do that with each one of these things all the way down through from 1 to 10. So now you've suddenly got all these things memorized. Then when you go to the grocery store, you don't have your list with you. But it's okay because you go through like one bun and you imagine yourself taking this bite of this hot bun and you see this onion inside of it. And you're like, oh, that's right. I got to go buy an onion. And then as you're going to buy your onion, you think about your shoes and you're like, oh, that's right. There are apples in my shoes. I need to go buy apples. And there are potatoes growing from my tree. I need to go grab potatoes. And you do that all the way through your list, and so now suddenly you can remember all 10 things that you need to get. This is how the Pegword system works. It's really, really great for working with memorized lists. And later in class, we're going to do some practice with this, because once you've memorized your Pegword system and you've associated everything with it, you'll be able to remember the numbers. Like you'll be able to go through and be like, oh, I know all the even numbers, all the odd numbers. I can tell you words, 4, 6, 8, and 9 at request, or I can do this list backwards. I can do it forwards. I can do it in any way you want me to do, because it's that good at helping you remember these things, so long as you can create these good, vivid mental associations. Now, our second thing that we're going to talk about, our second strategy, is the method of loci, or the memory palace. So you might have heard of the memory palace as this idea with someone like Sherlock Holmes. And this is how his famed memory works, is that he has this memory palace that he places all of his information into, and then he can retrieve it at will. So in order to use the method of loci, first you have to build a memory palace. And this simply means using a place that you know really well. And it should be a physical location like your house. Presumably you spent, hopefully maybe you have just moved and this is a little more difficult, but presumably your house is somewhere you know pretty well. You know the layout of the house, you know where everything is, more or less in it, at least broad strokes. And so you would use the house as your memory palace. For example, you could also do perhaps something like maybe you take the same drive to work or to school rather every day, or maybe you work somewhere and you know it pretty well. You choose a place that is familiar to you, that's a physical location. Then when you want to remember something, again, for example, we'll take this list of groceries that we just had. You would take a mental walk through the house and you would put these things in places in your memory palace. So again, we're going to use this house example. So for me, that might look like, again, I open up the door and the first thing I do, because the first thing on the list is an onion, I walk in the door and maybe I have a key rack inside the house right next to my front door. And I hang onions, a couple of onions off of this key rack. And they're just going to hang out there. And then I'm going to walk into my kitchen, or rather we'll walk into my living room next, because that would be the next place that I'd walk into. And as I walk into the living room, I take a couple apples and I set them down on the couch. Then maybe I take a stroll into the kitchen, and in the kitchen, I put a couple of potatoes, or I put one potato on each or on the counter by my sink, one on each side of the sink. And then because I need to remember some other things, perhaps I need to go buy some cinnamon. That was the fourth thing on the list. So I take some cinnamon and I put it inside the fridge. Again, that's a place that it wouldn't normally be, so maybe I have it in there. And then, I do that with all the things that I have on my list. And then when I need to remember or retrieve these things, when I go to the store, then I would simply take a walk back through my house, through my memory palace, and I would find them all. So I walk in the door, there are onions hanging there. I know I need to go buy onions. When I walk into my living room, I know that there are apples on the couch. So I grab the apples, I go and buy apples at the store. And this is how this system works. It's really, really great at working with, working with lists of items, as long as you, again, are able to pick a place that you are familiar with. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in class, though, as well as a couple other mnemonic devices and other memory strategies. But this is all I have for you today. So make sure you read the rest of the website, and it'll give you the rest of your instructions of what you're supposed to do for today.